Good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar on completing work. For anybody who's having difficulty logging in or hearing, please see the details on the screen or in the text box of who to call. And we will begin now. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying our respects to the traditional custodians of the country we meet on today. We pay tribute to them and their elders, both past and present, and to our future leaders. We welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. So good afternoon or good morning to some people from across the country. My name is Renee Christie and I'm joined here today with Karen Evans. We are both the New South Wales team leaders for Positive Partnership. Chris Champion is also joining us. He is our moderator and he is our National Coordinator of Projects and Innovations. So we're here today for an hour and we hope to share as much information as we can and learn a lot about you as well. So to do that, we'd like to run a few polls, and that is in the interest that we do have a large group. So we want to learn a little bit more about yourselves and to give us a bit of an idea of where we're all from. So we'll have a poll where we're going to ask you to enter your state or territory and from where you're dialing in from today. Can I ask that if you're sitting around a computer with other people, can you please type into the text box how many people you're sitting with? So for example, myself plus 3 people. And this just gives us a good idea of where you're from and how many people of you are there joining us today. So great, thanks everybody. It's great to see so many people from all across the country here joining us. So welcome again. Now the next poll we're going to run, it asks in what capacity you're attending today. So we open this webinar up for anyone to participate in. So we'd like to get a bit of an idea as to who's attending, whether you're a parent, a teacher, another professional service provider, or you might also be an individual on the spectrum yourself or someone studying at university. So please just let us know in what capacity you're attending today. And as I can see there's a lot of diversity amongst our group today. So welcome again, all the parents, teachers and professionals and individuals here today. So for those of you who are new to our webinars, we'll just take a moment to explain the tools. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, you will see where your name is listed. And looking down the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you will see an icon of a person. So this might be where you might like to choose to change your icon. And there's a few different options there. So for example, if you're feeling, it is the afternoon or the morning and you're feeling like a bit of caffeine, you might want to change your icon to a coffee cup. Or you might like to leave it there on a smiley face if you're happy to be joining us here today. Now just above the icon is a text box. Many of you have already been using that already. And throughout this webinar, we're really going to use this text box a lot, whereby we ask you to type any questions or comments into the text box. And we're going to have that up throughout the hour and learn lots from that because we love to share all of our ideas in there. Please ensure that the speaker icon has a red cross on it and the audio line will be on mute. So if time permits for us later on, we will open the phone line at the end of the webinar. There will be times during this webinar that we will ask you to share your thoughts and experiences. So you can do this in the text box. We have a diverse group participating today, parents, teachers, family members, professionals, and some of you on the spectrum yourselves. Please be mindful that this is a unique learning experience in a webinar. It's different to our workshops and learning and sharing face-to-face. So just try and give yourself this hour to be as present and focused as you can allow. It's easy to get distracted, so we encourage you to really try and make the most of this opportunity. There may be times throughout the webinar where there are moments of silence, so we ask you just to use these as much as you can to think and reflect on what's being said and heard. And finally, there is a link to this recording of this webinar that will be made available on the website in a few days' time. All the resources and links shared today will be emailed out to you following the webinar. So sit back and enjoy as much as you can from this experience and be sure that we will share everything that has been shared with you today. So today we're going to explore the 5 characteristics in the diversity of autism and the potential impact that they can have on completing work. This will then form the strategy or approach that will fit best. And we will also encourage you to share your comments, strategies and questions in the text box as we go. So in communication, this refers to a range of characteristics including how people communicate verbally and non-verbally, and how they understand the use of verbal and non-verbal communication. Social interaction will include how people use language socially and also interact with peers and adults. And the next characteristic, the restricted interest and repetitive behaviours, refers to the young person's level of need regarding that routine, rituals or special interest. And we think about how does your child cope when the class teacher is away. And you can also think about when you change something in a routine, or when you have to ask somebody to do a task other than what their preferred interest is. This is a characteristic that can really significantly impact on a young person's completion of tasks that are set. Just briefly, the sensory characteristics refer to whether your child is over or undersensitive to sounds, smells, taste, light or touch. And this also includes the need or the avoidance of pressure and movement. A challenge in any one of these areas can impact on a student's ability to complete work. So for example, if the student does not like being close to other students at the desk, this can distract them from their set work. And we have a webinar available on this topic if you want to learn more about sensory processing. We will discuss in this section on information processing and learning styles quite in depth as executive functioning and weak central coherence, which we'll explore a bit later, can impact significantly on a young person's ability to complete tasks both at home and school. It's an area that could be creating a great amount of stress for you and the student at home and at school. Like the previous characteristics, your young person's ability to process and understand, and particularly the speed at which they do so, will impact on their ability to complete work. While many of you will not have a formal IQ assessment of your child or student, you need to identify if the tasks are going to be too challenging or too easy. So as you look at this image of the diversity of autism, consider where are the strengths of the young people you support, and where are the difficulties or more challenging areas. A strength, for example, could be in a keen interest and knowledge about dinosaur facts. And this would be your young person's strength when completing a task on dinosaurs, but it could also be a challenge when a task is not related to this topic. A strength in communication could be that excellent verbal skills and the ability to talk at length about concepts. But a challenge here could be putting those ideas down on paper for an assessment task. We'll just touch here on the planning matrix, which is a tool we learn to understand in our Positive Partnerships workshops, and it can be used to map out your child or your student's strengths or areas of difficulties. Information can be gathered from home and school. So I'll just quickly take us through for those who don't know. So the characteristics row is where we document the individual's difficulties or strengths in that area that he or she displays. And this is written clearly by describing the behaviour that is observed using non-judgmental language. And you can see that these characteristics match to those characteristics in the previous slide. In the impact row, we record the effect or the impact that that particular characteristic has on the student at home and at school or in the community. A characteristic is in restricted interest might be that, for example, Sam focuses strongly on the title page of an assessment task. And the impact of this could be that Sam will rush the rest of the task. And it could also mean that Sam does not complete the task. So just giving a few examples of how this matrix can be used, and we're going to show you a few more as we go through each. In the strategies row, this can be used to reduce the impact of those strategies, of those characteristics. So the strategy for Sam could be that we need to ensure that the title page of a task is removed, or that it's added in at a later time. And for those of you who have not attended a Positive Partnerships workshop, we are going to email you information on where you can find out a whole module free to access on how you can use this matrix and how you can use it in lots of different settings, depending what professional background or, where the children are accessing your services. So remember, this is just a snapshot of how the student is coping at any one time, and ideally it's something that you'll do review in collaboration in that team approach. So for now, we're just going to discuss each of those areas. But before we do that, just touching on this, the homeschool partnership and the planning matrix. And the sharing of that information between home and school is so important. So the planning matrix can allow you to have a plan and solution-focused approach to these issues. And you can see that this image has the child at the centre, because the young person should be the one involved in the planning and the decision-making. And how this will look will depend on that person's skills, but also their involvement in the process can evolve and develop over time. So for the topic of completing work and the overlap between homeschool and post-school options, this is also important. And we're briefly going to use the example of the home behaviour to demonstrate the importance of the homeschool partnership. So let's think about a home behaviour, such as a chore or task that you would like your young person to perform with some independence. So this could be, like we've seen these images, the unstacking of a dishwasher, taking out the rubbish. Think about how did you or how do you teach these skills at home? When was the last time that you actually gave instructions, and did you model them? Did you have visuals? Did you break the task down? Did you give extra time? So what works when you teach a skill at home and what does not work? It's important to think about a lot of these things as we go. And what does work and what does not work is really important information for the school to know when they're teaching school behaviours. Importantly, you need to teach your child the concept of completing a task. If they're not expected to or not independently able to complete a one-step task, for example, this will impact on how the school will teach school behaviours. And more importantly, what they can expect from your child in terms of school work to be set. So let's just have a look at our text box here, and if anybody has any ideas of what's worked when you've been teaching home behaviours. So I guess this is for parents, thinking back to when you've taught these things, such as packing away or doing the washing, depending on the age of the individual. What has worked for you when you've been teaching home behaviours? Just comment in the box and we'll see what people have got there. Singing? Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, so often, reaching to that, the learning style of a young person and really engaging them in the song of the activity. Excellent. Thanks for that, Kerry. Yeah, so having the consequences. So that's a strategy that we look at later as well, where we're looking at, needing to do a task first and then getting their reward later. Visuals are great. Explicit modelling, thanks Chris, and breaking the task down. Rewards. Yeah, so we've got some great ideas there, and I hope that by thinking about the home behaviour and how you can really link that to the schools, the school can really help us as we move forward and throughout the school stages. So considering the home behaviour and the school behaviour, there's lots of steps that we need to consider when we're teaching that skill or we're learning a skill ourselves. Understanding the task and in the instructions given is really important. So thinking back to that last slide, or if you're a school staff member, how did you do this? How did you ensure that they were understanding a task or an instruction that was given? Were there challenges because you did not do this explicitly, and in what way have you been able to sort of change or adapt to support the student? The next little step here is sourcing the correct equipment for the completing of the task. So thinking about how we do support our young people to know what exactly they need to do, what we've asked them to do. So think and plan how to complete the task. Can the student see the end in sight? Or, you know what the steps are to completing that task, but how do they know, what the end is or what the end point might be? And how do we communicate that? So starting the task. So for some students, just helping them get to that first action can give them a kickstart in the next action. So we always need to consider the benefit of that first step. So maintaining concentration during the completion of a task. It might be useful to think about how we maintain concentration when we do our own work, and how long can your child or student maintain their concentration? How can you teach them to maintain concentration? And we have a number of strategies throughout this webinar that we can look at. I see we've got a few people answering some of those open-ended questions I've asked. So thank you, Samantha and Vicky, for sharing. So the next step here is finish the task in the allocated time frame. What is a realistic time frame for them? We need to consider that some students think that if they can't possibly do the task, so why would they bother starting? And some students avoid starting if it isn't actually a preferred task of theirs. And if necessary, let the appropriate person know that the task is complete. So who do they let know that they've finished, and can they do that independently, or do they need prompting? From a high school perspective, there are many students who complete tasks and do not hand them in. This could be homework or assessments, and this is actually a very important step, an important skill to teach in ensuring the success of the student. Finally, to know what to do if you haven't finished the task in the allocated time frame. Some students' stress levels can be elevated, and what can seem like avoidance is actually a need for extra time. What can seem like being lazy and not working hard enough is actually the need for extra time, not work avoidance. So I'm sure we're all feeling exhausted already thinking about all those steps. And teaching task completion is an area that impacts on our students' self-esteem and confidence at both home and school. So every student will need different types of support for different lengths of time to learn to complete different tasks. So I wonder if even already, we're 21 minutes in, have you already started to identify some possible reasons why your child or your student you support might find these tasks that we expect them to know how to do, why they might be finding them frustrating or challenging? And our focus as we move on through the rest of the webinar is going to be on the homeschool-based behaviours in relation to completing tasks. And we're going to refer to the young person on the autism spectrum as the student from here on. So we're going to look at each domain and some of our matrix and our diversity of autism and some of the possible strategies. And remember, as we show these strategies, they must be in relation to the individual characteristics and impacts of that person. The strategy must also be taught and monitored. So Emma's is that a question? Emma doesn't understand the concept. Yeah, so a lot of that's going to be looked at as we step back into these characteristics and look at some of the different impacts. So first I'm going to take us through communication. We're going to look at a couple of scenarios in the communication domain. And if the scenarios are currently not suitable for your student, please consider this as a solution-focused model that we're modelling and how you might apply it to your young person's communication style. So here we've got Billy. Billy does not ask for help with tasks. The impact of this is that Billy does not complete his tasks on time, and this could probably lead to frustration for Billy, possibly for his teachers or parents, and that he might give up before even starting, which then again could impact his self-esteem. So some of you may have a student that does not ask for help, and this can often be an IEP goal, an individual education program, which are set up within schools for the student. So we're going to explore 4 strategies for Billy, and a strategy that you could actually teach is how to ask for help, and it can be as simple as that, but very complex in getting to there. So this can be tricky, as often students can be embarrassed to do this and will wait until they are frustrated. And sometimes challenges in completing a task can actually look like non-compliance in the classroom. So we're going to look at a whole class strategy which is this, the cups. So we have green, yellow and red cups for asking for help. So I wonder if anybody has seen this, this strategy before. You can take the green, so when doing this strategy, you take the red and green cup and you might take them together, or they could be stacked inside each other. And the student is taught to flip the red up if they need help, or to stay at the green if they're feeling fine. And this is a great strategy as it does not involve the student getting up out of their seat. Yeah, very similar to the traffic light idea with those colours. So you can also include the yellow and teach what that means. So in this case, it might be that the yellow is that that they are needing, you know, a bit more time, or that they need the teacher to slow down, a bit like the traffic light there that you have. Here's another one. Could be a whole school strategy, or a whole class strategy, or individual. It reduces the need here for the student to verbally interact. So the students are taught to place one of these 3 cards on their desk in view of the teacher to indicate how they're going with the task. I like this simple version as it includes that I'm having a break or a rest, and it reduces the need for the teacher or the teacher's assistant to rely on the verbal prompt. And you're right, yeah, it doesn't always work for all, so that's a really important way of looking at these strategies and then really applying them to the individual and what could work. And, you know, it can be quite a long process in finding the right strategy for the individual. So this is an example of giving the student individual strategy. So it's giving them what is specific to them, it's been taught specific to them for when they do become frustrated. And you can see that it has, again, that colour scheme, a step-by-step process. And it also has tools there for the student for when they get frustrated. And yeah, we will send out all of these as well. So here we've got a high school example. So sometimes asking for help will look really different in a high school, as they usually have access to the devices that they either bring in or have at the school. They could be emailing their teacher to ask questions during a lesson, or after a lesson could also be socially appropriate in some settings. They could then organise a time at lunch or recess to talk to the teacher. And the teacher could then approach them during the lesson. So some high schools use platforms such as Google Classroom and Moodle, and I'd love to hear from teachers if they're, you know, the success of these types of platforms being quite new. Students can also post questions in these platforms, including posting their task completion. So yeah, it can be a really nice way of engaging and interacting. Teaching a student to use technology to communicate or ask for help relating to assignments as well. And of course, if your student is happy to ask questions directly to the teacher, then you don't always need this technology. So I've got another scenario here. Trying to look at the text box, trying to keep up with it, but it looks like we've got lots of conversation happening there, so I'll carry on. So another scenario we have here is Mary finds following verbal instructions difficult. So we probably have quite a few parents and teachers there who find that they have young people who have this difficulty or this challenge in following instructions too. So the impact for Mary in this case is that she does not start her task without individual prompting. We're going to look at a couple of simple strategies for Mary. So giving explicit instructions. Many schools are using individual whiteboards as a whole class strategy. A teacher could write individual instructions for a student, and these can be a great alternative to written checklists as they allow for more flexibility. You could have a long-term goal here of the student learning how to write the instructions themselves, or a peer could do it for them. An economical alternative that Karen has shown us is using a piece of cardboard as in a good quality plastic sleeve, and this works just as well in her experience. A great strategy for older students is to add the sticky note. You'll see the sticky note there in the corner of the board. Explicit instructions can be discreetly written and handed to the student as well. So for both of these examples, we've got words included, but on the whiteboard you can see there's images too, so they can be used too. For some students, images could work, or you could get devices that record the verbal instructions as well. And that brings us to another example we've heard and seen is the talking points, which is quite similar to many programs where you can record your voice. Talking points, if anyone's heard, you can leave a 10-second message on that. Thanks, Heath, for sharing that Seesaw. That's excellent. So I think we have one more scenario here. Claire, who finds it difficult to complete writing tasks as she's concerned about her spelling. So the impact for Claire is that she doesn't write as much as if she would have if she had something to support her. So let's just look at some of those strategies that we've found here that have been quite useful. And that's in the use of technology. And I'm sure lots of people have technology ideas and things that they've seen across the classrooms. It's always evolving. So technology, teaching students with those expressive language and significant spelling difficulties to use technology can increase their success. So this technology could be used to support the student at home and school. Word predictive functions work like the predictive text function on your phone. That could also help. And looking at the image here on the right, the technology allows the student to type in less letters as it predicts the word based on spelling, frequency of use, previous use and syntax, which is quite similar to what our text messaging does as well. Your student will need to be able to choose the word that they want from a list. So most predictive functions will allow you to click through the options and hear them read aloud. So if they're not sure of the spelling, they can identify words by listening to it. It can be quite a good interactive way. And there are a number of options such as co-writer and read and write, which again programs will send out links to. Dictation software applications could also support your young person to complete work. So the success of this strategy for your young person will depend on their articulation skills and their ability to dictate ideas and willingness to learn how to use this technology. And if you have an iPad, like we see here, the function is already available. You just tap on the microphone button on the iPad on-screen keyboard, and this tells the iPad that you're wanting to start dictating. The iPad will record your voice and turn it into text when you're finished. So you tap the microphone button again to stop dictating. And we have lots of other devices such as Apple Mac will also have this function available. For some students, they feel a lot more comfortable initially using these types of technology devices at home first. So like anything, if your student for your student to successfully use this, use technology to complete work, it does take practice. So I just wonder if anybody has any examples of technology and ideas that they've started teaching either at home and school, how it works. We often hear lots of great ideas in our workshops, things that are new and interesting for everybody. So it's a great opportunity to see and learn. Yeah, and the Seesaw app seems to be quite a good one in the classroom. Thanks for sharing, Narissa. And Samantha, great. Excellent, you've seen it on a mobile phone as well, fantastic. Thanks, Vicky. Lots of great ideas. So I'm actually going to now hand over to Karen. She's going to take us through the second half of the webinar and look through the rest of the characteristics there. And yeah, so thank you very much, Karen. I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Renee. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to look at the social characteristics and how they can impact on a student completing work. This domain can include how the student initiates and sustains conversations and how they interact with their peers in the playground and classroom, and particularly even how they interact with their siblings and adults. So our first scenario we're going to explore is group work. For our scenario, Chloe likes to dominate any group work. the impact of that is that Chloe can get really frustrated if other students don't want to use her ideas. And some of you might relate to this, having a student who really likes to dominate group work. So we're going to look at 2 strategies. Great. The first one on the left is roll cards. And some people may have already actually used them. Both the ones I'm going to talk about, both roll cards and the Y chart, are whole class strategies. And I can see from the text box, a lot of people are liking the idea of strategies that are for the whole class. So roll cards are good for students working in groups. This is because they will assign them a role. And for some students, this could be a role that's achievable for them. For some students, it may be not letting them be the leader and giving other students a chance to have a voice. You need to make sure that for some roles, like a presenter, it doesn't mean they don't do anything. So they just sit and just wait till they present. They're actually still also involved in the activities. So a lot of these, if you just Google free roll cards or group work cards, there are so many examples on the website. And this one that's shown in the image, we will email to you. And then you could maybe fiddle with it and have a look at how it could work. The other strategy on the right is called a Y chart, and I really like this. What it does, it breaks down what does group work look like, feel like, and sound like. So we can sometimes assume that even no matter what grade the student is in, that they actually know how to do this. And what's really good is actually teaching the whole class appropriate behaviours. And in a really great way, it does involve teaching acceptance, difference and tolerance to the whole class. Can anyone share with me any ways that they have actually taught group work to their own students? So in the top text box, can anyone think of another way that they've been encouraging their child to be involved in group work? So there could be at home or at school. Has anyone got any ideas to share with the group on how to improve group work? I really like that, Kerry. Definitely agree with starting in pairs. Social stories, video modelling, showing them what it should look like. Yep, another one with starting with pairs, great. Some students actually having a familiar group to work with for a little amount of time and then maybe getting them used to working in group and then allowing other students. Sometimes having a really comfortable area to work in so they have a really set place they know and they feel comfortable and there's no sensory issues to work in their group. Social instructions and comic strips, great ideas from everybody. Thanks for sharing. So our next scenario is we've got Jack, and Jack will not ask his peers for help. And I'm going to explain this a bit further why it's here. So Jack misses out on social opportunities with his peers. So if you think back to when you were at school, what did you do to ask for help? Did you only just interact with your teacher, or did you actually like to chat to your peers? So not actually interacting with your peers is actually a really important thing because they're really missing out on social interaction opportunities. I'm going to show you a visual cue strategy that I actually made for a student a number of years ago. And you can see this student, the first thing the student always used to do was ask the teacher for help. Straight away, it was always his go-to strategy. So with the teacher and the student, we came up with this checklist. So the idea is that he looks at the instructions on the board, look at what the other students are doing. There's so many cues that students often on the spectrum don't look for and aren't used to and not taught to look for, cueing what's actually happening around them. Then they could ask the peer for help. And then the last strategy is asking a teacher for help. And it's, again, another whole class strategy where it can not just be for the student on the spectrum, they actually could be the whole class. And a buddy system there. Thanks, Vanessa, can help with that as well. Thanks. Great, we're going to move into restricted interest and repetitive behaviours. That need for sameness and routine and marked interest in special topics could really be impacting on your child or student's ability to complete tasks. So for our first scenario, we got Sam. Sam will constantly ask what is on today and becomes upset when plans change. And you already might be thinking this is related to a student or a child that you work with. So this leads to really heightened anxiety for Sam, and so therefore he just finds concentrating on work just quite overwhelming. And when you're anxious and your anxiety level's up, you just can't take it, quite overwhelming. And when you're anxious and your anxiety level's up, you just can't take in a lot of information. So we're going to have a look at some strategies. So a really simple one, and a lot of you probably already have used this. I always think when explaining it, it's back when we were kids and you couldn't get your ice cream till you ate your vegetables. So it's what can you do first, and then you get a reward. And it's a really simple. So this student it is written for is just a student who can just only cope with one or two things in a row. So the first and then is a great strategy around teaching routines. The next one is for students who might just only cope with knowing what's happening in the morning. So they can see that student just needs a routine of the morning. So sometimes when you think about your own child or a student, we go to a whole day. Maybe that's actually too much. They're actually not ready for that. So always think about just starting from maybe a chunk, and maybe just in the morning, the middle of the day, and then the afternoon is enough that they can cope with and helps with lower anxiety levels. You can see on the right that I've got the visuals that are made off BoardMaker for a whole class timetable. So that can be put up on the board, and from my experience with schools is that the whole class loves this. While the visual schedule has BoardMaker symbols, you don't have to use those. For older classes, you might make up their own, and they will just get really into it and what they want their schedule to look like. And as a class teacher, you actually don't even have to take ownership of changing it. The kids take ownership of it. But what I've got on there for you is you can see the little special event star. So while some kids like routine, we actually need to teach them when things change, how to cope with that, and it's actually okay. So in your visual schedule, have the flexibility to have a visual to put in there and say there's a change happening or there's a special event happening and this is what's going to happen. The other one I purposely put in there is wet weather. Sometimes students who really are outdoorsy just really don't like it when, of course, it's wet weather and they've got to stay in the classroom. So if they find that quite overwhelming, it can get quite noisy, depending on where they are, then that learning for the rest of the day is just gone because they've just not had a break. So considering including that, visual schedules and what impact it has on the amount of work the student completes. The next one we've got is a really quick high school example. Just clicking now. And that's an example of a schedule that's been colour-coded. So for a student wanting to know what's happening in the day, how organised am I, then that is a coloured one. And we've got some examples to show you. And kids can actually have their books colour-coded to match that. Sometimes they might like to even choose the colours they colour-code it. They might like to colour code by rooms. They might like to colour code by the teacher. You just really be really flexible on what they want it to look like for them. And I really was put down here in the high school and primary school, it's really important to support the student to plan for any changes to routine, such as dress-up days and musty days. And I'm a really big believer in this. The number of kids don't pick up on the cues. The special event is happening in the school. They turn up to class, and what happens is everyone's in special socks or everyone's in a special colour. And so that student then impacts on them for the rest of the day, how engaged they are in the class, because they're quite upset or stressed about the fact that they're one of the few people that have not realised there's been a big change in routine. We've just got some quick hints here that, a reminder of why visual schedules are so important. They show the students what's happening, they provide predictability, they prepare for change, they promote independence, and they can help reduce anxiety. So our next one in restricted interest and repetitive behaviours is that Adam finds it difficult to concentrate on a task for more than 5 minutes. Requires constant prompting and is limited engagement with tasks. So this can actually be quite stressful for you as a parent or as a student, how long a student engages in a task. So workstations are a strategy that I really like. You can see in the visual on the right and left are 2 examples of it. So we've got the student where this student on the left is just going to do 3 tasks. And they do one, they move to the next box, they move to the next box, and often the third one is actually a reward. And the example on the side is just showing you on the right what's a little box system, and I'm sure everybody's seen these in one of the cheap shops. You just put the activities in there, and maybe things they can do independently, and you leave, and it builds up really quickly. There's a really good idea around this workstation beliefs is not just a primary school thing. You can do it for high school students, and you just make it appropriate, and it will be a folder, the old folders with ring bound, and you can put sleeves in there, and it's still that philosophy of teaching them step by step how to do a task and getting them to be independent for longer. And this day when we don't know how much, or there is limited teacher aid support in class, then learning and teaching independence is really important. And we've got on both sides here just the idea of simple boxes. It doesn't have to be trays, what the student needs to do, and finished. And it already came up today in the text box, somebody wrote about the idea of the finished symbol and how much they like it. The one on the right is just a 3, 2, 1, and it's actually more of a time thing where you actually put the cards out and you have the finished symbol, and you just come over as a teacher or a parent and you go, I'm going to take 3 away. You're going really well. Then I'm going to come over and take 2 away. And then I'm going to take 1 away. So it's actually not timed to a timer. You actually own it, how long they work for, and as you see how they're going, you can be flexible on when you remove the card. Because sometimes the timer, that student just sits and watches the timer and watches it count down, whereas this you own when you take away and how long you go for. Our last one here is using special interest. So a big believer in the idea of using special interest. And Temple Graham has said many autistic children get fixated on one subject, such as trains or maps. The best way to deal with fixations is to use them to motivate for schoolwork. If a child likes trains, then use trains to teach them. And the one here I've got an example of a student who likes butterflies, and you can see how simple it is. She doesn't have to write about butterflies, nothing overwhelming. Her spelling sheet just had a couple of different examples with just coloured butterflies on it. And allowing them time to engage in their special interests after they've done work can be highly, highly motivating for them. We're going to have a quick look at sensory processing. And some of these things have already come up. So we're not using scenarios for this section, but we're just going to talk about the importance, and it's already been brought up, the importance of break passes. So it's in sensory because sometimes students actually need a break for sensory, for movement break, and that's there. And it can be something that it doesn't happen automatic for some students. They actually need to be taught how to use it, model it, explain it. They're so important. And one thing to be really mindful of, it's not earned. A break pass isn't earned. If a student is not coping well, sometimes teachers can get, or parents can get into the habit of going, well, I'm not going to give you a break, when actually their behaviour is showing it they need it. So you don't earn a break, it's set up to have a break, if that makes sense. And that can sometimes be really hard when you come in and a student has got in a bit of a trouble and they haven't been given a break, and the belief is they need to earn a break, which is not true. On the side there is when it's too noisy. So for a student, if concentrating in class can be quite overwhelming with noise, you need to have a strategy to help them cope with the noise and then allowing them time to re-engage back into the task. One quick thing on break passes is a lot of parents get or worry about, or teachers worry about, that they're going to abuse the idea of a break pass. So that can be really simply set up at the start by just saying you're allowed 1 break per session, and then you own it, not the student, and it can be really easily monitored. So while a lot of people talk and worry about it, I think it's really not a big thing to cope with. This is one we really like as a positive partnerships, again, what idea of where do I focus. So for some students with sensory needs, they can get really lost in what's actually happening in the classroom. So a teacher might be giving really important instruction of a math concept, but they're actually not focusing where they need to focus. They might be distracted in their book. So rather than call the student's name out constantly, which can actually be, not good for the teacher or the parent or the other students, using their verbal, it's just using a really simple, where do I focus? And for this one, they need to focus on their book work. So it's a really simple idea of, teaching the students about where they concentrate. And how long it will take for the task is in sensory, because for all of us and many students, we want to know how long this is going to go for. So I can concentrate and stay relaxed if I know how long it's going to go for. So we've got start, almost done, finished. Again, you could put a little marker on there for a student. They could be cut up and you take them away. And down in the bottom corner is a timer. So it's not actually a timer that goes up, it's the timer that goes down. So that it's a really nice rewarding for the student to see time going away and then getting down to 0. We are now in the vast area, which is the information processing and learning style. There's quite a lot in here, as Renee talked about at the start. So we've got a number of scenarios of information processing and learning style to go through. So for this one, Van finds it difficult to start an assessment task and identify what she needs to do. Van avoids starting a task and often does not hand in the completed task, and this may be irrelevant for you and your child. So just simply breaking a task down and explaining, and this can be done at home or at school, and really sitting down and breaking it down. What do you know about it already? Read through it, highlight any key terms. Look at the marking criteria is so important. It gives you so many hints on how to do a task. It's often called a rubric. Sounds super fancy, but it's just the marking criteria. Breaking the task down into steps and actually creating a check-off list, adding in how maybe a time frame for the student, and then having a look at how they're going to present it. And you don't want them focusing on so much time on actually the presentation of it and does the title page look pretty, but breaking it down. Graphic organisers are great. I really love these, and they can be really used if you want to help the student plan their task. So the one on the left there, it's got a cause and effect. So it might be a task, but they've got to look at the cause and effect, and they can just break down what am I going to be writing about. They're great because they're visual. They're great because you don't need a lot of language. They can be used for assignments, and they can be used for in class. And there are so many free examples on the internet that you can just Google graphic organisers, and there's a world of graphic organisers out there that are really good for students on the spectrum. And just a reminder, all of these are going to be emailed to you. Beck will focus on one specific detail of the assessment or task. What the impact is that Beck does not complete her assignment on time and misses out on important details. And again, this information processing can be both stressful at home and at school for the student. So for not completing work, the idea is, again, a different type of assessment planner, and this one's really focused on time. So for Beck, she was struggling with the timing of how long she spends on things, so you could sit down and can break up the assessment and go, how long will I spend on each of them? And what I really like on this one is you can see at the bottom there, there's a teacher comment. So Beck has to actually show the teacher at each stage how much has she done, rather than wait till the end and it's due today and she's hardly done anything. Stressful for school, it's stressful for home, and it's stressful for the student. To consider with executive functioning is just something really quick points. Planning and doing a task, regulating the behaviour, impulse control, attention, working memory, organising. Oops, sorry about that. Got a bit over. We've already kind of touched on regulating behaviour. We've definitely already touched on attention. But what we're going to look more at is in this section is the planning and the organising. For this example, Emma needs verbal prompting to collect the correct equipment and start a routine task. Emma gets frustrated when she can't keep up with her students and she just give up. So that's a student who just needs that prompting, constantly prompting to get the right stuff. She's running late. The other kids have all started. So she just goes, I'm just going to give up. So this is a really simple visual that can go on their table, and you could do a high school version of this, you could do a primary version of this. You can see this one's quite a primary orientated with the visuals. But you can actually do this for, and I've had it with a student where the student got started and had everything out, but they had an obsession with rubbers and pencils. So on their table, before they even started work, were 20 rubbers, 20 pencils. So you can use the concept of this as actually really limiting how many pencils, rubbers, rulers are allowed on the desk before they get started, because for some students that it could be a bit of a real interest in those things happening, and they're limiting the amount of work that they get done. This is a really good concept that I like about. We've already used the green and red a lot. So this is the idea of where do I start and where do I finish. So Emma needed prompting to where to get started. So you can put a little green dot. Emma, I want you to start here and just go to here and finish here, and then I'll come and see how you're going. So using that idea of stop signs can be so good for students, the colour, and then linking it to something that they may be interested in. Our next example, Pip does not complete a homework task. Pip gets upset at home when she's expected to do some homework. At school, she gets in trouble for not doing tasks. So this may be really familiar for you, and homework can be exceptionally stressful. So we're just going to have a look at some plans. So on there we've got the one on the side, which is a homework plan. When they get home, what do? I have a break. I set up my desk, I do some spelling, I do some maths, I do some reading, and then I'm finished, and then I get my reward. Homework, we've got more of a story style. So this one's got a bit more detail about what time she'll start, what she's expected to do, how long for, where she'll work, and what I do if I need help, and then that reward as well. And you know what Vicky just said then is definitely what's happened during the day can actually have an impact on homework. So how long that break goes for, and as you know, some days you just go, let's not even worry about it. In the scheme of everything, it's been a really busy day and quite overwhelming. Homework is probably the last thing that you want to try and touch on. But about that and the decisions you make around that is so important to have that homeschool communication with self. I've got one that's quite like, which is suitable for more older students, and it's got how long a task will take. For some students, they really want to know how long can I work for. It can be used for students who need motivation to do it, but also for students who do too much homework. You might have a student who just does way too much homework and assessment time. So they could use this, looking at what the tasks they've got to do. Are they actually important? Do they need to be done today? Can they be done tomorrow? And spreading it out. And then putting down how long it will take. Siblings annoying them while they're trying to work. Yeah, that's a really good important point there, Emma, about thinking about where they work and how you can do it, and maybe you could have different timings. And I'm sure people might be able to jot in some ideas for Emma around work, siblings and homework. Megan, with if they can't get them to do any homework at all, and it does, I agree with you, end up with meltdowns for everyone. I think that's a really important time to have a homeschool conversation around homework and what can it look like and what can be expected. And at this point in time, is it a priority? Ali does not take the correct equipment to school. Ali can can't participate in PE, and she misses out on social opportunities and exercise. So this is a really simple, in the information processing and learning style, thinking about organisation and are they actually taking the right equipment to school. And so just a really simple checklist. This could be primary, it could be high school, what's on today. High school can be quite challenging with the different days and how things move around, but just trying to have a checklist as best you can because they miss out, unfortunately. For this one, Anna gets upset when she makes mistakes. So we're really turning now to perfectionism as a concept of that impacting on how much a student completes work. She does not finish work as she's not satisfied with her work. So just can't be happy with how she's going. And that can be very debilitating, the idea of perfectionism. So making mistakes is proof that you are trying, and making mistakes is okay. It's just the idea that to teach students that it's okay to make mistakes. And a really good way for you to model that, do we expect perfectionism in our own life? I hope no one's perfect. So sometimes for your student on the spectrum, it's so important to actually model that and talk to them about it. Because you can get students down the track as they get older and assessments and exams and so stressed about the marks they're getting can be very debilitating. This is a really good checklist about, and I'll send this to you, about some ideas about problem solving, that making mistakes is okay. And what we do, we learn from mistakes. And it shows that we've tried, we've given it a go, we've learned what we've done wrong, and we'll try it again. This is one I've used with a student who really was so stressed about assessment. So wanting to get 98, but what I would do is sit and problem solve with her. What actually mark did she want to get? And then what range would she be happy with? So in that conversation, it had to be about how much homework she'd done, how much she'd been doing in class, what was the type of exam she was going to do? Was it a strength? Was it not a strength? And then really a range, then be just focused on a mark. And then after the exam came back, we would sit and problem solve. Well, what did you get? were you in your range, and have to problem solve what were you happy with about what you got. Did you do well in a certain bit? Just trying to problem solve, because high expectations can be so debilitating that when the student gets back their mark from an assessment, they're so overwhelmed that any feedback the teacher gives in those next 2 lessons are not even going in because they're so stressed. So it's really important to consider when you're thinking about homework, is the level of difficulty not too challenging? Great. So your student can quite comfortably do homework. Is the level of difficulty too hard? Is actually the reason why your student's getting quite stressed? Is it too hard? Or is it too low and they're not being challenged? So there's some conversations, and it's already been brought up. If homework is stressful for you, you need to talk to school and talk about what can be done. So same as assessment. If it's going okay and your student needs minimal support, great. If the level of difficulty is too hard that it actually turns out to be your assignment, not theirs, is it too easy and they're not even giving it a go and you can see that? Again, having homeschool communication, because homework assessments, completing work, all this topic can be so stressful at school and at home. And the final adjustment we're just going to quickly talk about is reading pens. So reading pens is a really great strategy, and you can see on the right there, it actually scans over words and reads the words. So if your student's ability to participate in class, participate in homework is impeded by their reading ability, a scanning pen can just read to them. It actually can plug in earphones as well as just listen to them, and they're great. So we're using them a lot where I live for exams. So instead of having a student sit and read to them, you can actually plug it in and they can listen to it. And it's actually the technology, like Renee talked about further, is just getting better and better in this. They are quite expensive, so they're in about the $200–300 range. Again, like Renee talked about, possibly a strategy you would try at home, then take to school, because sometimes the student can be really embarrassed and not comfortable in doing it. So you want them to be okay and comfortable with using the technology that is so available now to them. If you have a student who comes home really tired and it's come up that they're really anxious, actually not having to concentrate and put that effort into reading can make such a difference, and they can actually just listen and then do that. And I'll just hand back over to Renee.
Yes, thanks, Karen, and thank you. We've just about made it to the end, and we did start a little bit late. So I just want to make a final message here. And as you've seen, Karen and I have shared a huge amount of strategies here, but just remembering to always, for your individual student or young person, always go back to that, thinking about what's individualised to them. So make sure you're considering the characteristics and that impact that's really that priority in their life at the moment. And then we can't emphasise enough that importance of discussing those strategies between home and school and other professionals about what's really great and what's working, and then coming up with things that you're going to share together. So we will share with you a module on how to understand the matrix in more detail, but I think we've given you a really good overview of it even there. So I'll just point out that that's our website. And we also have a Facebook page, and this has been recorded, so you can listen to it again. It's going to be up on our website. See there on the left-hand tile in the middle, that's where all our webinars are recorded and listed. So again, something you could possibly share with your parents or your school to give them a quick overview of what we've discussed today. So encourage you to look there, encourage you to look at our Facebook page. We've got a lot of tips and information on there regarding supporting young people on the autism spectrum, and we want this page to offer evidence-based resources about autism and inform people about what we're doing as positive partnerships and the workshops that we have coming up. So we encourage you to leave a lot of comments and photos and links, and we review this so that we know that it's a really positive and evidence-informed page. So I will also, I think our final, we've got a list of upcoming workshops. So this is only in the next month, as we do run webinars monthly. So you can find out on our website when the next webinar is. And also if you happen to be in those areas there, we have parent workshops happening in those regions. So thank you everybody. We've just gone over time, but we are going to leave the the webinar up for about 10 minutes, so you can comment in the text box. And Karen and I have said we're happy to stay on the line as well if anybody wishes to ask any questions over the audio line. So what I'll do now is just unmute everybody. Can I ask that if you aren't going to ask any questions, just mute yourselves on your end so that we don't get a lot of feedback. Oh yeah, and Chris has probably just prompted me there that we do have a survey as well. So please, I encourage you, you can actually click there on the SurveyMonkey link, and you can complete a survey about how you found this webinar to be. Chris has also linked the survey there in the text box. So we'll encourage all your feedback, as you know, all of the feedback informs how we continue providing as much useful information as possible. So yeah, I'll just open up the lines now for if anybody needs, feel free to.
The moderator has placed the conference into conversation mode. All participants are now unmuted.
Does anybody have any questions for Karen or I?
Hi Renee, it's just Chris. I'd love people, because I think there was quite a few who weren't hearing you at the start. If people who were still on board and were sitting around a computer with someone, if they could type in how many people were sitting with them, that would be fantastic. So we get an accurate representation of numbers.
Okay, it doesn't sound like we have any questions. So like just a lot of information to process there. So we might just close the line then, and like I said before, we will leave the text box open. So if something comes to your mind, like I said before, we will leave the text box open. So if something comes to your mind, we'll hang on the webinar and answer anything then. So thank you everybody for all of your comments and ideas, and your attention and your encouraging comments there at the end. So have a lovely afternoon.